Welcome to our channel Excel Stories. Enjoy watching. She counted the exits while still at the door. Not intentionally. It happened on its own. Like breathing or squinting in bright light. The body did its thing while the mind was busy thinking about something else. 2 exits plus the service door by the refrigerators, which no one uses during lunchtime. The table was against the wall, at a 45-degree angle to both. She set down the tray and sat down. The cafeteria at Philadelphia Police Department headquarters is packed at 12:30 p.m. Plainclothes detectives, uniformed patrolmen, girls from the finance department with plastic lunch containers they brought from home. The smell of roasted and bad coffee. The hum of 3 dozen conversations. The clatter of dishes on plastic trays, someone's laughter in the far corner. The woman in a dark blue jacket and jeans ate in silence. There was a visitor's badge hanging around his neck.
Not an employee's. "Look who has come to visit us." A voice covered the nearest 3 tables. Detective Ray Torres had a way of speaking so that everyone who needed to hear could hear. 28 years. 8 of which had been with the department, the last 2 in the Property Crimes Detective Division. Broad-shouldered, with that special expression you get from people who've never lost a verbal duel in their lives, and are therefore sure it means something. "Do our excursions go all the way to the cafeteria now?" Several people raised their heads. Someone chuckled. The woman did not pick it up. She continued eating at the same speed she'd started, evenly. No rush. Torres walked past her desk, deliberately brushing his shoulder against the back of her chair, and sat down with his men. 4 guys from his department, plus Becca, the forensic scientist, who always ate with them, even though his department was 2 floors up. Torres said, already on his own turf, already at his own table, already for his own audience. "A lawyer, maybe," someone suggested. "Lawyers don't have time for lunch at 1 o'clock. Becca looked at the woman in the dark blue jacket and said nothing. He was busy with his own work. He had a habit of observing things others overlooked, whether professional deformation or natural inclination. He'd long since stopped trying to decide which came first. He noticed how she chose her seat, how she glanced at both exits before picking up her fork. How her weight was evenly distributed in the chair, her back straight, not leaning on the backrest. It wasn't about posture. Such details almost always reveal more about a person's past than any words. Naomi hasn't said anything yet, but her body is already betraying her experience of living in an environment where people assess threats before they sit down to eat. This is well known in trauma psychology. After long periods of working in dangerous or unpredictable conditions, vigilance ceases to be a decision and becomes automatic. So Hunter is calculating her exits even before she has time to consider whether she wants to do so. He looked away and began to think about something else. But the thought didn't go away. It remained somewhere on the periphery, caught in something he couldn't yet name. It caught in it and waited. Torres ate and talked. It was his default mode. He was telling a story about yesterday's mission, and 3 of the 4 laughed at the right moments, not because it was funny, but because laughing was easier than not laughing. The 4th, a young lieutenant, Derek Cole, 3 weeks into his service, shifted his food from one side of the tray to the other and stared at his plate. He wasn't yet sure how to respond to Torres. That required experience he didn't have. The woman in the blue jacket was eating. Torres called over his shoulder in her direction. "Have you been planning this for long?" She didn't answer. "I am addressing you." "I heard," she said. The voice was even. Not rude, not polite, just level, like the horizon. She said this without looking up from her plate, in the tone one uses when speaking to someone who doesn't deserve their full attention. Not out of arrogance, simply out of a precise calculation of how much attention is needed. Torres felt something unpleasant.
Not anger yet. Something that preceded anger. The feeling that he hadn't been allowed to close the door he'd opened. "It's nice to sit," he said into the air, already turning away, as if he didn't care anymore. Becker looked at his watch and stood up with a tray. In 3 days, he'll understand what exactly had stuck. But for now, nothing. Just a feeling of weight that hasn't dissipated. Like the smell of rain in the air long before it starts. The next day, Cole choked in the cafeteria. Derek Cole, 23, 3 weeks into his job, his first meal without a senior officer to report to. A piece of sandwich. Just a piece of sandwich at the worst possible moment. He froze, his mouth open, both hands to his throat. Either a gesture or a reflex, and his face began to change color faster than anyone could even comprehend what was happening. 4 people stood nearby. One was shaking his shoulder. The second was already reaching for the phone. The third said, quote, 4, as if the name would help. The woman in the blue jacket was already there. She didn't run. She simply appeared, 5 meters away. And then she was already there, her hand on Cole's chest, the other wrapped around his arms. She turned him around and lifted him from the chair in a second with such mechanical precision as if she'd done it before.
Not the first dozen times. 5 thrusts under the diaphragm, one after the other, sharp and precise. Her lips counting something, no one heard what. On the 4th, the piece came out. She turned him toward her. She ran her thumb over his mouth, one short, confident gesture. 2 fingers under the corner of his jaw, a second. Then her hand settled between his shoulder blades, and her voice, the same even, without a single superfluous note. "Breathe. Slowly. Look at me." Cole breathed. Color was returning to his face. "Small ones. Okay. Once again." "Are you feeling unwell?" someone said behind her. "He's fine," she said without turning around. "Give him some water. Little sips, don't rush." Becker stood 2 meters away. He'd come for coffee and stayed. And he looked at what was now before him, not at Cole, but at her, and that old feeling of weight that had been lingering in the background for 3 days shifted. Like when you're trying to remember a word and it suddenly comes to you.
It hadn't come yet, but it shifted. She stepped away, making sure there was someone reliable nearby. She nodded, not to the others, more for herself. She returned to her table. She picked up a fork. Torres looked at her from across the cafeteria. He was late. 30 seconds late, and that was it. He started to get up, but she was already there, and by the time he realized what had happened, it was all over. And now he stood at his desk, his role in an event that had happened without him unclear, watching the woman with the visitor's badge eat soup as if she hadn't just rescued someone from the dead. Something about it felt wrong. Not bad, just wrong. Like a puzzle, where one piece fits perfectly, but in the wrong place. He put the tray back. He sat down, and began to think about what to do with it. This, doing something, turned out to be what such things always turn out to be, in people who cannot accept it when their audience is taken away from them. It began quietly. The next day,
Torres entered the cafeteria a little earlier than usual. He saw her already seated. He said something to his men. They laughed. She didn't look up. On the 3rd day, he began commenting out loud on her food choices. His voice carried to the entire third of the room. Something about tourists who come into the workplace and take up space with those working. Something about a badge that tells you everything you need to know. His 4 laughed. Cole sat with red ears and looked at his plate. The woman was eating. There was something about it that made Becker's chest tighten. Not exactly anger, something calmer and more unpleasant than anger. He sat at his desk, watching, and thinking about how 300 people could pass by the same thing every day if it didn't happen quickly, but little by little. 1 drop at lunch. When nothing special is happening,
no one is obliged to intervene.
That's exactly why it works. This is how everyday humiliation typically works in closed groups. Not as one big scandal, but as a series of small scenes, each of which makes it easy for everyone to assume nothing serious has happened. Torres isn't so much interested in Naomi herself as in the audience and the affirmation of her own authority, while those around her find it easier to remain silent because each individual drop seems too small to intervene. In social psychology, this is called the normalization of behavior through repetition. If a group tolerates the same minor cruelty for long enough, it begins to perceive it not as an event, but as background. On the fourth day, Torres caught Cole at the coffee maker. Not rudely, even gently, almost friendly. He said something about lieutenants not being allowed to accept help from people with unknown badges. About how everything in the department is governed by procedure, and if someone isn't covered by that procedure, it's unclear what they're doing there. About how Cole's career was just beginning, and it would be a good idea to know which table to sit at. Cole nodded. He nodded with that special air of young people who already understand the conversation is wrong, but don't yet know how to get out of it without breaking something important. The woman in the blue jacket took the coffee and walked past them. She didn't look at Torres. She looked at Cole. One glance, a second. And in that look, there was neither pity nor condemnation. Just calm, even attention. The way someone says something important, not with words. Cole watched her go. Then he looked at Torres. And for the first time in a week, something fell into place in his head. Becker thought about this in the lab building while he waited for results on a case that had been pending for 3 weeks. He wasn't thinking about her specifically. He was thinking about how memory works, about how sometimes you recognize a person not by their face. A face can be forgotten. A face changes. You recognize them by their movement, by the way their body occupies space, by the way it reacts to a threat or the absence of one. In 2018, he was retraining at Quantico. 3 weeks of criminal profiling, dry August, poor air conditioning, and one instructor he remembered not because she was the best, though she was, but because she once stopped a case study in the middle, stood at the board and said, "And all 22 cadets were indeed looking in the wrong place." He didn't remember her face. He'd seen her for a week and hadn't seen her since. She was a federal agent from some agency that didn't identify itself directly. One of those instructors who appear and disappear, and whose names on the schedule are abbreviated instead of their last names. But he remembered how she stood. He remembered how her weight was distributed on the chair. He remembered that she always sat with her back to the wall. Becker rose from his desk so abruptly that the papers slid to the floor. He didn't pick them up. He was already heading for the elevator. That evening, Torres sat in his car in the parking lot and did not drive home. He sat there with the keys in his hand and the engine wouldn't start. And he thought that something was wrong, but not in the way he was used to thinking about that word. Usually, when Torres thought something was wrong, it meant something was wrong somewhere outside. Circumstances, people, the system. Now this feeling came from within. He thought about Cole, about the boy standing by the coffee maker with that look on his face, about what Torres had said to him. He played it back like a recording, word by word, and the second time these words sounded different. He wasn't a villain. He believed it. He thought he was teaching the boy how the system worked, that he was preparing him for the fact that it was harsh and had rules, that you had to understand those rules, otherwise they would break you. It was sincere. It came from the place where most cruelty comes from a sincere conviction that one was right. But when Cole looked at him after he had watched her go, Torres saw the difference between what he thought he was doing and what he was actually doing. He sat in the car for another 10 minutes. Then he started the engine. He didn't know that tomorrow it wouldn't matter anymore. That tomorrow
would happen what happens when a person breaks someone else's life, drop by drop, until that very last drop is reached, which isn't about volume, but about time. The fifth day began with a statement. Torres filed it with HR this morning. Formally, it's a complaint about a protocol violation. An unidentified individual with a temporary badge is systematically violating access rules in restricted areas of the administration building. He is allegedly filming employees without permission. He refuses to identify himself. None of these statements were true, to the extent that they had to be true to carry weight. But they were all true, to the extent that HR doesn't check such things themselves. There was a young specialist working there, Jennifer Chang, 26 years old, 8 months on the job. The application from the senior detective with 2 signatures looked like an application from a senior detective with 2 signatures. She entered into the system, access pending. Then she closed the tab and opened the next one. The system accepted it without any questions. Systems are always accepted without question. That's their whole value and their whole flaw. The woman was stopped at the turnstile the next day. The guard was confused, an older man, about 40, with the kind of expression you get when you say something unpleasant when there's no other way out. "Your badge is marked," he said. "Until they sort it out, I need to ask you to wait in the lobby." The woman nodded. Not, "It's a misunderstanding," not, "Do you even understand what's going on here?" She simply nodded, that brief nod that acknowledges a fact that requires no discussion. "Give me the appeal form," she said. The guard gave it. She filled it out right there at the counter. Carefully, without making any mistakes, she asked for a copy. She folded it into a small, dark notebook, which she took out of her inside jacket pocket. The notebook was almost full. The guard followed her into the hall and stared for a moment at the counter where she had just been standing. Then he picked up his copy of the form, held it up to his face, and read it again. Something in the handwriting, the way the numbers were written, the way she held the pen. He put the form aside and turned his attention to the next person in line. But he thought about it several more times throughout the rest of the day. No reason, he was just going back. Becker found what he was looking for in the Quantico archives that morning. Not the name. The name was classified at a level he didn't have access to. But he found the instructor's abbreviation on an old 2018 retraining schedule, stored in a restricted section of the FBI database as training material. And next to it was the agency, and the nature of the assignments the instructor had worked on before teaching. Becker closed the file. He closed it very carefully, as if you were closing something you didn't want to accidentally drop. Then I opened it again, reread one line, closed it again. He sat and thought about the cafeteria, about the chair against the wall, about how she'd walked into the cafeteria on the first day, how she'd counted the exits. It was obvious if you knew where to look. How her body was ready, even when she was just eating soup. He thought about how some professions leave traces not in documents can be sealed, but in the way a person enters an unfamiliar room. Becker dialed his FBI handler, a man he'd worked with on 2 joint cases and could therefore reach informally. "Quote 14, quote," he said. "Quote 15, quote. It depends on the question. The abbreviation Hawthorne, the year 2018, Quantico. Is it the Bureau or not the Bureau?" Long pause. "Where did you get this?" "Old schedule, nothing I don't have access to." Another pause. Becker could hear him thinking. "This isn't the Bureau," the curator finally said. "And I won't tell you anything more about it. One last question. You said 1. Could a person with this abbreviation be in Philadelphia now?" Silence. Long. "Becker," the curator finally said, "you're a forensic scientist. Do your job." He hung up. Becker put the phone down on the table. He looked at the opposite wall. Outside, it was raining. For the 3rd day in a row, A gray, steady Philadelphia November rain. He thought about how sometimes the most important things are what's happening outside the documents. What's in the documents is only a shadow of what's actually happening. And that someone understood this very well when they chose how to enter this building. He stood up, put on his jacket. He went downstairs, not to the cafeteria, but to the parking lot. To a woman in a dark blue jacket who was sitting on a bench under the awning with a notepad on her lap, waiting for her badge to be sorted out. He came over and sat down next to me, without explanation. She didn't look at him right away. She finished writing the line. She closed the notebook. "Criminal investigation," he said. "Becker." "I know," she said. "Quantico, summer 2018, he said. "You were leading the profiling unit. It was the third week, when we were all about to melt from the heat, and you stopped the debriefing halfway through and said we were looking in the wrong direction." She was silent for a moment. "You were looking in the wrong direction," she said. "I remember. Everyone only remembers what they're told." She looked up at him. For the first time in days, a direct, unwavering gaze. "You wrote down why?" "I wrote it down," he agreed. Pause. Rain. "Why are you here?" he said, not a question. More like a test to see if she could hear his intonation. "I was asked." "I understand that. I mean something else. Why in civilian clothes? Why like this?" She looked at the parking lot. "You can't tell a unit's identity by how they act on parade," she said. "You tell it by how they act when no one's looking." Becker nodded slowly. "And what did you see?" "Enough," she said, "and more good than bad, but one bad thing, which grew because no one was doing anything about it." Becker thought about Torres, about what he'd seen in the cafeteria that week, about the laughter that wasn't laughter, just the sound people make when they're afraid of silence. He said, "I know," she said again. "It is groundless." "I know." "Then why don't you?" "Because I don't need it," she said simply. "Everything I need is already written down." She patted the notepad. Becker looked at it, at the neat dark rectangle in her lap, at the hands that lay calmly on it, not squeezing or kneading. He thought that a person who keeps such a notebook does not need anyone to rush things. "I can make one call," he said. "Not formally, differently." She closed her eyes for a moment. "No need," she said, "but thank you." They sat under the awning for a few more minutes. The rain fell a meter away. Somewhere in the control hall, the usual work was going on. Documents, databases, 3 phones simultaneously on a table. "Cole," Becker said. "He's good." "I know," she said for the third time. And this third time, it sounded different. A little warmer. Not much, but noticeable. "You are looking after him." "It's not me who's looking after him. He can handle it himself. He just needs to make sure no one breaks it while he's studying." Becker nodded. He stood up and buttoned his jacket. "The schedule for the summer of 2018, he said. It had the abbreviation Hawthorne on it, nothing else. She didn't answer. 42. He said he left. She sat for a little while longer. Then she opened her notebook. She wrote one more line. She closed it. The 6th day was short. Torres suppressed Friday and pretended nothing had happened. That's how people who want to believe the machine will resolve itself operate. His 4 friends hadn't known how to feel about him for the last 2 days. They laughed less. They sat closer, out of habit, not desire. Cole sat down at another table, not demonstratively. I simply found a seat at the other end of the cafeteria. With 2 guys from the duty station, whom I knew by name, I ate without even looking at my plate. A woman in a blue jacket entered the cafeteria with a temporary guest pass instead of her main badge. Her access was still pending. The security guard at the entrance, the same one who had stopped her earlier in the week, let her through silently and made a more careful note in his logbook than usual. Torres saw the temporary pass and read it as permission. This is what unanswered insolence does to people. They start reading everything as permission. A temporary pass meant the rules didn't fully apply to her, so more was possible. He got up from the table before his food had time to get cold. The cafeteria was packed.
It was Friday lunchtime, and everyone was on time. 300 people with trays, badges, and chatter about the end of the week. Torres walked along the serving line to where she'd just picked up her tray. He was in no hurry. It was a theater. He had worked in this space for a long time, and knew the acoustics, and knew where to stand to be heard by everyone who needed to be heard. He said, his voice filling the entire line. She took the bowl of soup without looking. He paused. Another pause. The tray flew out of her hands. Not himself. Torres pushed him from below, sharply, with the edge of his palm. Soup, plate, glass of water, everything fell to the floor. A sound in a crowded cafeteria, metal on tile, glass, liquid. The sound stops everyone who hears it. A reflex. 300 heads turned. Torres laughed. He laughed and turned to the audience, because this was his final monologue and he needed an audience. He turned around and saw that there was an audience, 300 people. And that no one was laughing. The woman looked at the floor. Then she looked up at him. There was nothing in her gaze. No anger, no fear, no resentment. Just the same steady, patient attention, like that of someone looking at something completely predictable and seeing it behave exactly as they expected. She bent down and picked up the tray. She placed it on the railing. She gathered the glass shards between two fingers and placed them on the edge. She straightened up. "Okay," she said. The voice was quiet, not for the audience, but for him. But in the silence that hung over the cafeteria, the silence of 300 stopped conversations and 300 raised heads, everyone heard it. "Okay, Detective Torres." His name. She said it calmly, like someone reading something from a piece of paper already in front of you. Like a statement, like a signature. Torres opened his mouth. Closed. Something cold ran down his spine. He couldn't say why. She knew his name. So what? Everyone knew his name. He'd worked at this department for 7 years. But the way she said it, as if it had already been written down, as if it was already in the right column of the right document. Cole stood up at the other table, slowly. No drama. Just stood and watched. Becker stood motionless by the coffee machine. He held the glass in his hand, looking at it, and at him, and thinking about the things a forensic scientist sees in a scene others merely observe. About disposition. About who occupied what position over the previous 6 days. About how scenes that take place in rooms with 300 witnesses are later documented in very detailed reports. The woman approached the serving counter. "Can I have some more soup, please?" she said to the cook. The cook poured. She picked up the tray and walked to her desk. Her back was to the wall, at a 45-degree angle to both exits. Torres was not sitting in his car in the parking lot that evening. He sat in a bar on Chestnut Street, alone, with a glass of bourbon, which he hardly drank, and thought. He thought about his father, a street crime detective, 22 years in the department, a tough man in a tough job, who taught him that in this city, in this job, you can't let up. Not because you want to be tough, but because the toughness around you demands something tougher. Torres had carried this with him since he was 17. It was his armor and his language. It was what he understood by the word strength. He thought about his father's death 8 months ago. He hadn't been there fully. He was there physically, but something inside him had closed back in the hospital, in the hallway, when the doctor said, "We did everything we could," in that professional tone that signifies the end. And since then, Something inside him had been working intermittently.
Something was angry at everything. At those who, it seemed to him, broke the rules. At those who went where they shouldn't. At those who didn't fit into the routine. He didn't realize until today that they were the same thing. That the grief, which had nowhere to go, went in the only available direction. It didn't relieve anything. He knew that well enough not to entertain any illusions. An explanation isn't an excuse. Pain doesn't give you the right to blame it on strangers. But understanding is the first step to stopping. Torres finished his bourbon. He left the money on the counter and left. It was raining outside. That same November rain that had been falling for 4 days now. He stood outside without an umbrella until he was sufficiently soaked. Then I caught a taxi and went home. 7th day. Torres arrived at the office earlier than usual. Before HR opened, before most of his department had arrived. He walked up to Jennifer Chang's desk, where she was still sorting through papers, and said, "I want to withdraw my statement from the 5th. Chang looked at him. He clarified. "You can submit a withdrawal form, but the procedure," Torres said. He filled it out there and signed it. Chang accepted it without question. Then Torres stood by the window in the hallway, looking out at the wet parking lot below, and thought that this was perhaps the smallest thing he could do, and it didn't free him from anything, but it was something. He went to his room and got busy with his business. The 8th day was ordinary. A woman in a blue jacket arrived at the cafeteria at 12:30, her primary badge restored. The security guard nodded to her. She picked up a tray and sat down at her table. Torres sat at the other end of the room. Not ostentatiously far away, just at the other end. The 4 of them ate nearby. No one commented. Cole walked in, saw her, came over and sat down opposite her. "May I?" he asked. "Of course," she said. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Then Cole said, "I wanted to say thank you. Back then, at the beginning of the week, He paused. "Thank you." "You were breathing correctly," she said. "That was the main thing." "I breathed because you taught me how." She looked at him with the same calm attention, no condescension, no unnecessary warmth, just attention. "You're a good man, Cole," she said. "Don't lose this." He nodded. There was silence again. "Why in civilian clothes?" he said finally, quietly, not for the others. "All week. Why is that?" She took the coffee. "You can't know how a system works if the system knows that someone is looking at it." Cole thought about it. "And what did you see?" she said. "It's me? Not only you, but you too." Becker came over with his coffee. He looked at her and asked, "May I have some?" She nodded. He sat down. "Tomorrow," he said. "Is it tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," she confirmed. Cole looked from one to the other. "What tomorrow?" No one answered. But they both smiled faintly at the same time, not at each other, but in different directions. And Cole realized this was one of those questions he'd find the answer to on his own. Day 9. The cafeteria at 11:30 isn't yet crowded, but it's already bustling. Detectives from the first ranch, patrolmen after their morning shift, a few people from the prosecutor's office who stop by occasionally for old time's sake. The door opened at 11:45. Deputy Commissioner Margaret Whitehead entered with the head of personnel and the senior security advisor. She was in uniform, a 60-year-old woman with that special calm that comes with people who have made decisions difficult enough to be unshaken by the next ones. A woman in a dark blue jacket was walking next to her, without a temporary badge, without a guest pass, with a small dark notebook in his hand. Whitehead stopped in the center of the cafeteria. "Attention!" This word, spoken by the deputy commissioner in the cafeteria, does what this word does everywhere. It stops everything.
Trays freeze. Conversations are interrupted. There aren't 300 heads, but those that are there are plenty. "I'd like to introduce you to the new head of Investigative Unit 7. Whitehead paused. "Major Naomi Hunter, former Special Agent, Joint Operations Command. 14 years of operational experience. Certified in crisis response, tactical medicine, and criminal profiling." Another pause. Whitehead glanced around the room. "She spent 8 days in this building, in civilian clothes, at my request." Silence. Major Hunter stood calmly next to Whitehead. Her arms were at her sides. Her weight was even. Her back was straight, not a military posture, but simply the body of a person hiding nothing and defending herself from nothing. Cole was at the far end of the cafeteria. He stood up. Not because anyone else had stood up. He just stood up.
Becker didn't move at the coffee machine. But something on his face, very slight, at eye level, changed. Like a man whose life has finally clicked. Whitehead continued. Quote 65. Pause. Quote 66. Torres sat at a table in the middle of the room. The four of him were looking at trays. Whitehead said evenly, "The silence in the cafeteria was of a different quality than that which comes from random noise. That silence was a reaction. This one was understanding." Whitehead looked around the room again. Underscore, quote, 69, underscore. She nodded to Hunter, turned and left. Major Hunter remained. She stood there for another second. Then she walked to the serving counter, picked up a tray and nodded to the cook, the same one who had poured her soup after Torres knocked down the first one. The cook nodded back, the way you nod when you want to say more but don't know how. She walked to her desk, back to the wall, 45 degrees to both exits. Cole approached with his tray. "Ken?" "Of course," she said. Torres was summoned that same day. Disciplinary proceedings based on such a large amount of recorded material are not a quick process, but they are inevitable. His lawyer told him there was a chance he could retain his position, but the road ahead was long. Torres understood. Then he asked for 5 minutes. He went into the hallway and took out his phone. He dialed the number of the management psychologist, which he had been given 8 months ago, after his father's death, and which he had then removed from his contacts and did not open. Asked to make an appointment. This wasn't redemption. He understood that clearly enough not to call it anything else. It was simply the beginning of a different movement, different from the one he'd been moving toward for the past year. Jennifer Chang, a young HR specialist, learned the news at the end of the day. She reviewed the case files that had run through her system. She read the application form Torres submitted on the 5th day. She read the revocation form he submitted on the 7th. Then she opened her search window and found the instructions for verifying security breach reports, the very ones she should have read before submitting them. Printed it out and pinned it above the table. That was something too. Cole proved to be a good listener, a rare quality in young people who don't yet know much, and therefore usually listen with half their attention, while the other half formulates what to say in response. He wasn't that good. He simply listened. In the following weeks, he attended Becker's open case hearings. He wasn't obligated to. He just went. Becker didn't chase him away. Sometimes he'd point and say, "Look here." Once he'd say, __, quote, _71, __. Cole was recording. Hunter saw it sometimes, walking past, from her new office to the cafeteria and back. She didn't comment. But the first time she saw Cole listening to Becker with the same look he had when he sat under her desk those first few days, not confused, but focused, she paused for a second in the hallway and thought, "That's it. That's it." It's not that you can change a person from the outside. It's that the right person, in the right place, knows where to grow. They just need no one to interfere.
Late one evening in late November, when the corridors of control were almost empty, Hunter sat in her office with a black briefcase on her desk. Inside, on the dark foam, lay a medal for outstanding service, a standard one, without any particular story. A photograph of 5 people on the roof of some building, against a summer sky, everyone squinting in the light. A piece of paper folded in 4, soft at the folds from being opened many times. She looked at the photograph. 2019.
It doesn't matter where. What matters is 4 people inside, 2 outside. Everything is going wrong. She was connected. She was speaking. She was a voice that didn't change pitch, while 8 other voices in the headphones did what voices do in a crisis. Operative Lucas Peterson walked back. There was a wounded man there. There was a man who couldn't walk on his own. And Peterson followed him with that look. Hunter saw it on camera. Of a man who's already made up his mind and isn't discussing it any further. He led the wounded man to the wall. He didn't come out on his own. She said his call sign once, in a flat voice, because her voice was all she had left for everyone else. And because breaking it meant losing someone else. She led the others out. Then she went herself, when everything had quieted down, and took what was left. The medal in the case had her name on it. She never understood why, or maybe she understood but didn't accept it. The voice had done its job. Peterson had accomplished what the voice couldn't. She placed 2 fingers on the photograph. Easy. Then she closed the case. I set the alarm for 5:30 and turned off the light. They called in December. They didn't say anything extra, just a code name she didn't know still existed. 3 years ago, she put it in a locked drawer with the briefcase and closed it. Ironwood, when ready. Hawthorne. She read it twice. She looked out the window. December in Philadelphia. Gray, wet, cold, honest. Lights on the bridge, the dark water of the river below, and somewhere beyond the river, everything she hadn't seen 3 months ago, when she'd boarded the plane with 1 suitcase and the thought that the new division was a place where she could do something concrete. She didn't answer right away. She put the phone on the table. She opened her notebook, new, almost pageless, and wrote 1 line. She closed it. I looked at the city. Section 7 was good. The people were good, mostly. Cole was learning. Becker did his job as few others could. Chang hung the instructions above her desk. Torres went to see a psychologist. She learned this by accident, not intentionally, just 1 conversation in the hallway, 1 hint. She didn't know if it would change anything. Sometimes people start moving and then stop. Sometimes they don't. It's not her decision. But she thought about it. That the person who breaks others is usually broken somewhere inside themselves. This doesn't absolve them of responsibility. It never does. But understanding it is another matter. Torres lost his father. He bore it for 8 months without words. He directed it where he could. She too had lost someone. She carried it differently, in her notebooks, in her even voice, in her habit of counting her exits before sitting down. We all wear it. The difference is what we do with it. This thought contains the entire moral of the story. Torres lost his father and turned his unprocessed grief into pressure on those he perceived as weaker or strangers. Hunter too lost someone and lives with an experience that remains forever etched in her body. But she transforms it not into a license to inflict pain, but into discipline, consideration, and protection for others. Psychology has long distinguished between these 2 paths. Trauma can explain behavior, but it should not become a license for cruelty. That's why the main question here is not who was hurt more, but what each of them decided to do with their wound. She took the phone. I typed 1 word. Soon. Sent. Put the phone in her pocket. I left the office. Walked down the dark corridor to the elevator, down into the hall, to the exit. The night shift guard nodded. She nodded in response. I went outside. The December air was wet, heavy, and smelled of the river and something distant, like snow that hadn't started falling yet. She stood there for a minute, just stood there. Then she went to the car. She didn't know what would happen next. It was honest. It was normal. She knew she'd done what she'd come for. That the 7th Department stood straighter than it had 9 weeks ago. That one young man now knew he didn't have to get stuck. That one middle-aged man had begun the long journey back to his old self. And that somewhere, in another city, in another building, something else is waiting. It was bittersweet. Leaving is always bittersweet. It was the right thing to do. Leaving at the right time is also a form of work. She opened the car and placed the notebook on the passenger seat, started the engine. Here we go. The first morning of January in Philadelphia smells different than the first morning of December. December smells like the end. January smells like a beginning that doesn't yet know what it will be. It smells of cold without snow, of salt from the river, of someone's hot coffee from a thermos at the bus stop, drunk standing because there's no time to sit down. Hunter arrived at the office at 6:20, earlier than most. It wasn't a demonstration, just a routine you can't break, because it's ingrained deeper than habit, at the biological level. The body wakes up before the mind can decide whether it needs to. The parking lot was almost empty. 2 night shift patrolmen stood at the entrance, tired, holding coffee. The counter attendant, who already knew her by sight, nodded. She nodded. The office was the same as it had been in November, except now there was a plaque with her name on the door. Small, metal. Major N. Hunter, Special Operations Team 7. Someone had screwed it on in her absence, perfectly, without any gaps. And it was one of those little details that says more about the person who made it than any report ever could. She came in, put the coffee on the table, opened the folder. The 7th Division received 3 new cases in the week between the holidays. Standard work, 2 cases of financial fraud, and 1 case of corporate data theft, which looked standard until page 3, and then stopped being standard. She read slowly. She made notes in the margins with pencil, never with pen, always with pencil, because mistakes happen and because thoughts sometimes change. There was a knock at 7:20. Come in. Cole, with 2 glasses of coffee, one his own, one, judging by the way he held it, brought especially for him. He set them on the edge of the table. I didn't know how you drank, he said. I got black. If not, there's... It's fine, she said. Thank you. He didn't leave right away. He remained in the doorway with the air of a man who has something he's been carrying for days and now doesn't know where to put it. Go ahead, Hunter said, not looking up from the folder. Cole said. And? Hunter looked up and looked at him for a few seconds. She said. Cole sat down. He told his story. It took 7 minutes, and in those 7 minutes, he never once said and he never once began a sentence with underscore, underscore. 2 phrases young people use as a defensive layer when they're not sure they're being taken seriously. He just said what he saw. Hunter listened. Quote, she asked when he finished. Not yet. Show me, today. Cole nodded and stood up. She said. He turned around. He nodded briefly, slightly embarrassed. The way people nod at something important when they don't know what to do with it. He left. Hunter returned to the folder. Dawn was breaking outside. Slowly, reluctantly, like January, as if the light was reluctant to begin another day. But it did anyway. Becker came to her at 10, himself. No call, no appointment. He simply knocked, walked in, and sat down across from her, like someone with whom formalities were unnecessary. They both knew where this was coming from. Some conversations establish a level of sophistication without words. "Cole showed you?" Hunter asked. "Just now." Becker placed the folder on the table. "He's right. There's a discrepancy in the inspection report. It's minor, but if you pull it out..." "Pull. I need an official request for a re-examination. Through you." "It will be today," she said. Becker nodded.
He didn't move. __quote_87_Hunter asked. He paused. It was the kind of pause Hunter knew how to read. Not awkwardness, but preparation. A man about to say something he'd been meaning to say for a long time. "I made some inquiries," Becker said, "after we talked in November, about Quantico." "I know what you did," Hunter said. Pause. "And you didn't say anything." She looked at him evenly. Becker agreed. But he didn't stand up. Sometimes people who do certain jobs carry it with them. It's not pathetic. It's simply a medical fact about the nervous system and cumulative stress. "Becker, I'm a forensic scientist. I read scenes." He looked at her without apology, but also without pressure. Just straight. "When you walked in on the first day, you counted the exits before you even picked up a tray. Your back never touches the back of the chair. You eat, but you monitor the perimeter the whole time. That's not caution. That's a body that can't turn off mode." Hunter said nothing. "That's not my question," Becker said. "I'm sorry, it's none of my business." "No," she agreed. She paused. "But you're right." He stood up. "An official request for an examination," he reminded. "You'll have it before lunch." He nodded and walked towards the door. Becker turned around. __quote_99__. She picked up a pencil and turned it over in her fingers. Something in his face changed slightly. She said. He nodded and left. Hunter remained with a pencil in her hand. Outside, January had finally dawned, gray, flat, without illusions. She wrote the request, signed it, put it in the outbox. Then she got up, took her jacket, and went on her morning rounds. Walkthroughs are a part of the job that aren't mentioned in job descriptions. Formally, they mean visiting the department's workspaces. In reality, they mean walking through, seeing, and letting people see you. Some managers do this for control, others do it for visibility. Hunter did it because the space you don't watch changes without you. Always, in any department. And that's normal, but you need to know how. The first floor was the duty station, 4 of them. She knew their names already in November, and by mid-December, she knew who worked best in the morning, who worked best in the afternoon, who had a small child at home, and who therefore came in sleep-deprived on Wednesdays. Not to make adjustments for lack of sleep, just to know. The second floor was for analysts. 7 people, 3 of them new since October. One of the newcomers, Jimenez, worked the fastest and made the most mistakes. It was a direct connection he hadn't yet seen. Hunter did. She hadn't told him yet. It wasn't the time. She'd wait another 2 weeks and see if he'd come to that conclusion on his own. Sometimes people come on their own. You have to give them time. The third floor was her department, plus the adjacent ones. Investigators, technicians, 2 from the prosecutor's office who had worked with them on 2 cases. She stayed here longer. She spoke with 2 investigators about the case she had read that morning. She heard things that weren't in the file. Intonations, doubts, theories that hadn't made it into the official report because they lacked the necessary evidence. This was also data. Chang stood by the coffee machine on the 3rd floor. Hunter wasn't expecting her here. HR was on the 4th floor. Chang clearly wasn't expecting her either. She froze for a moment, then nodded. "Major Hunter." Chang. A pause. Chang held the glass with both hands, not from the cold, just because. A nervous gesture one doesn't notice. I wanted to see. Chang began. You don't need to, Hunter said.
I need to. Chang looked at her. There was something in her gaze that deserved respect. Not washed out, not polite. Real. I didn't check the statement. I should have. There were blanks, and I didn't check because it was a senior detective, and because it was faster. I know. It wasn't supposed to work like that. No, Hunter agreed. It shouldn't. Chang nodded, looking into the glass. ___, quote _ 105 ___, Hunter said. Chang looked up. I know, Hunter said. That's right. But one instruction doesn't change the system. The system changes when a person understands why the instruction exists. A pause. You already understand. It's late, Chang said quietly. Quote, 106, quote, Hunter said. Quote, 107, quote. She took the coffee and moved on. Petrov arrived at the end of January. Alexander Petrov, 41, a Boston investigator temporarily assigned to the 7th Division on a multi-regional securities fraud case. Tall and laconic, he has that distinctive St. Petersburg accent that never fades, no matter how long he's lived in the States. 23 years in the States, and the accent remains. He arrived on Monday morning with a folder under his arm and the air of a man who is used to working on his own and is unsure how to work in someone else's space. Hunter walked him around the department herself. She showed him his workspace and introduced him to those he would be interacting with. He nodded. He asked precise questions, only those that were essential to getting started. The question is not relevant, he said when they finished their rounds. Ask away. Protocol of joint decisions. If I see something that goes beyond my mandate but relates to your case, what happens? Verbally first, to me or Becker, then in writing, if there's reason to move forward. Petrov nodded. It's different in Boston, he said. Not with a grudge, just information. I know how it is in Boston, Hunter said. Here we work verbally first. It's faster and allows us to catch errors before they become documents. He looked at her with the expression you get when you've expected one thing and heard something else. Not disappointment, more like a reassessment. Got it, he said. Petrov. Yes. Your latest report on the Connor case. It's in Appendix 3, Table 7. There's an error in the recalculation methodology. Pause. Quote 111, she said without apology. Quote 112. Quote 113, he asked. Not much. It doesn't change the outcome, but it does change the strength of your argument if the defense presses. He looked at her for a few seconds. Then he took out his phone and wrote something down. Thank you, he said. It was the first time that day that his voice had any intonation. Before, it had just been information. Hunter nodded. The coffee on the 3rd floor is better than the 2nd, she said. Just a fact. Petrov allowed himself something that in another person would have been a smile, but in him it was merely a change in the line of his mouth. He turned and walked back to his desk. February brought snow. A real heavy snowstorm. The kind that happens in Philadelphia once every few years, and which the city greets with both delight and utter unpreparedness. The streets were covered by nightfall. By Monday morning, 2/3 of the department's parking lot was uncleared. Hunter arrived at 6:30, following the cleared tracks of other people's cars. Someone had arrived even earlier. A security guard stood at the entrance with a shovel, clearly not expecting one this season. On a snowy day, the cafeteria gets packed early. People come to warm up. People linger. People get a second coffee simply because there's snow outside and they don't feel like going anywhere. Hunter took the tray and took a seat against the wall, an old habit. At the next table, Becker was reading something on his tablet. Cole ate silently, looking out the window at the snow with the same look people have when they didn't grow up where it snowed, as something beautiful they don't know what to do with. "From Florida?" Hunter asked. Cole looked at her. "From Georgia," he said. "Where?" "You look at the snow as if it were a stranger." Becker looked up from his tablet, the corners of his mouth drooping slightly, his equivalent of laughter. "It snows in Georgia?" Cole said with dignity. "It happens," Hunter agreed. "Rarely." Cole looked at the snow again. "Beautiful," he said. "Simple." "Yes," Hunter said. They ate in silence for a few minutes. It was a different silence than the one in this cafeteria in November. Not tense, not expectant. Just three people at one table on a snowy Monday, each with their own. Then Torres entered the cafeteria. It was the first time Hunter had seen him since November. She knew he was still in management. Production was slow. The decision hadn't been made yet. He was working in a limited capacity, handling administrative tasks. Her department didn't interact with him. He took the tray, turned around and saw her. There was a pause. Not long. A second. Maybe less. Then he nodded. Hunter responded in kind. Torres went to the far table and sat down, alone. His four companions were sitting at the other end, but he chose not to join them. He ate in silence. Cole looked at his plate. "He's walking," he said quietly. "No question." "I know," Hunter said, to Gomez, from the psychological services. Cole looked up. "It's not a secret. He told someone in the hallway himself. Openly." Hunter said nothing. She looked into her coffee. "That means something," Cole said. "That means," she agreed. "Is this enough?" Hunter thought. "That's a start," she said. "Sufficiency is another matter. It's not decided in one season." Cole nodded slowly. "But the beginning is something." "Yes," Hunter said. "The beginning is something." Snow was falling outside. Thick, even, methodical. The kind that stays put for a long time. The parking lot lights blurred into circles. Two patrolmen at the entrance were already building something out of the snowballs, thinking no one was watching. Becker put the tablet down. "Simone's case," he said. "Cole showed it to me on Friday. I think there's more to it than meets the eye." "I think so too," Hunter said. "We need one more person for analytics. I have a candidate." "Who?" "Jimenez from the second floor." Hunter looked at him. "He's in a hurry," Becker said. "But he sees connections quickly. He needs a task that requires both, where haste is a resource, not a risk. If he agrees to work under supervision for the first 3 cases..." "He'll agree," Becker said. "He just doesn't know he can do more than he thinks." Hunter took the coffee. "Make arrangements with him. If he comes, it will be on Monday." Becker nodded and stood up. "Becker?" she said, turned around. "Thanks for Cole." He looked at her. "It's not my job," he said. "No," she agreed. "That's exactly why." Becker left. Cole looked at the snow. Hunter drank coffee. Somewhere on the other side of the cafeteria, Torres was eating alone. Slowly. No phone, no conversation. Just eating and looking out the window. The same place Cole was looking. At the same snow. His expression was different, but with the same strange, inexplicable peace that comes from people who've started something difficult and still haven't quit. At the end of February, they called again. Not the same number, a different one, but Hunter knew where it came from. She knew it from the way he remained silent for the first 2 seconds before speaking. For people with some training, silence at the beginning of a call isn't awkwardness. It's a test of the line. "Ironwood," said the voice. "I'm listening," Hunter said. "The date is ready. March, 3rd week. If you're ready." Hunter stood by her office window. Outside, Philadelphia at the end of February. The snow had almost melted, leaving a grey slush along the sidewalks. The sky was low and milky. "What region?" she asked. "Northwest. Contract term. Open." She was silent for a moment. "Give me a week." "Fine." The connection ended. Hunter stood by the window for another minute. Then she returned to the desk. She opened the folder with Simone's file. She read the last page, closed it. She flipped to a blank page, wrote at the top, "Transitional Protocol, SS07." This wasn't a transfer order. That hadn't happened yet. This was preparation.
Hunter didn't know how to leave without leaving behind a self-sustaining order. This took time. It required being honest with herself about what was ready and what wasn't. Cole was ready to work independently under proper supervision. He needed someone who wouldn't break things. This was now in his favor. He knew how to recognize it. Becker doesn't need anyone. He was the system long before her. Jimenez will be the department's top analyst in 2 months, unless he starts rushing again. There's a risk, a manageable risk. Petrov is temporary and will leave in March when the case is closed. He'll leave behind some good material. Chang is on the 4th floor, in a different department, but she posted the instructions. She'll check. Torres. Hunter settled on that name. The disciplinary proceedings by March will likely result in a demotion and probation.
Not dismissal. The materials didn't reach that threshold, and Hunter didn't push for it, because the goal wasn't to destroy the person. The goal was to stop the behavior. The behavior has stopped. The man began another movement. She didn't know where it would lead him. It wasn't hers to know. Her work ended where his began. She wrote a few more lines, closed the sheet of paper, put it away in the desk drawer. Outside, Philadelphia was beginning to turn dark. The lights were coming on one by one, from the river up toward the center. She recognized this city differently than she'd thought when she arrived. She'd thought it was work, a department, a cause. It turned out to be people, as it always turned out. People who are stuck in habits without realizing they're stuck. People who saw and kept quiet because it was easier. People who did the right thing when they thought no one was watching. That's the most honest thing of all. She thought about Lucas Peterson. I've thought about it often. I'm not bitter anymore. That happened several years ago. I was just thinking how people think about someone who defines something important in how you understand work. Peterson didn't turn back because he wasn't afraid. He was afraid. She could see it in the way he walked. He walked because the other option wasn't an option for him. It wasn't bravery in the sense people talk about at celebratory events. It was simply who he was. Hunter sometimes thought about what this had taught her. Not about tactics or procedure, about how people sometimes do decisive things, not when it's logical or safe, but when they can't do otherwise. When their internal structure doesn't allow for anything else. It was perhaps the most accurate answer to the question she sometimes asked herself: why work the way she did? Why come in civilian clothes? Why spend 8 days in the cafeteria? Why the notebook? Because she couldn't do it any other way. A week passed. Hunter called. "March. 3rd week," she said. "I'm ready." "Okay," said the voice. "The details will be sent to a secure address." One question before that. "Ask away." "The unit I'm going to. Do they know how I work?" Pause. "They know you're working in civilian clothes for the first few weeks. No details." "Okay," Hunter said. "That's better." She put the phone away. In the hallway beyond the door, the usual sounds of control could be heard. Someone walking down the hallway. The telephone ringing at the reception desk. The elevator arriving at the 3rd floor, and opening with that metallic sound she had become so accustomed to that she had stopped hearing it. Habituation is also information. When something stops distracting you, you've become part of the place. This is both good and a little sad. She opened the desk drawer and took out the transition protocol.
I finished writing the last section. Succession recommendations. Who could take over the department temporarily? And here she wrote a name she hadn't expected to write 3 months ago, but which now seemed the only logical one. The name of a man who could see what others missed, and who had long been the center of the department, simply beyond his position. Becker T. Recommended for temporary performance of duties. She looked at what was written. Then I added below in small pencil, in italics, not for the record, but for myself. Cole, no rush. He's going the right way. Close the folder. 2 weeks before her departure, Hunter walked into Becker's office. He sat over something that took up his entire desk. Printouts, photographs, 3 colored markers.
Simon's case, in its final stages, turned out not to be securities fraud, but something much bigger. And that much bigger now required at least a month's work. He looked up. "I'm getting a reassignment," Hunter said. "March." Becker looked at her. "I'm leaving the protocol to the successor. You're there." "In what capacity?" "Temporary replacement, until a permanent manager arrives." Becker looked at his materials, then at her. "It's not mine," he said. "I know you think so," Hunter said. "I think differently. You don't have to agree with my assessment, but it will be in the documents." "I'm a criminologist," he said. "I'm not a manager. Management is seeing what's going on in a room before it's spoken." She looked at him. "You do it every day. You just haven't called it that." Becker remained silent. "That's not an order," Hunter said. "It's a recommendation. The final decision isn't mine." She turned to leave. "Hawthorne," Becker said. She stopped. "It was the right schedule," he said. "Summer of 18. "Yes," Hunter said. "It was." "Those 22 people, they're everywhere now. Some in the investigative departments, some in the administration." A pause. "You know that?" "No," she said. "I didn't know." "Now you know." She stood at the door for a few seconds. "Thank you," she said finally, simply, without reservation. Becker nodded and returned to the materials. The last day in office was ordinary. Hunter held a morning meeting. She signed 3 documents. She discussed an analytical task with Jimenez, which he finally got right because, for the first time, he took his time. And she noted it out loud without any pathos, simply, "Just like that." Jimenez blushed and wrote something down. After lunch, she went into the cafeteria for the last time. She took a tray and chose a seat by the wall. 45 degrees to both exits. At the next table, Cole was talking to someone from the duty station. He was laughing. It was a real laugh. Not the kind you laugh when you have to, but the kind you laugh at something real. Hunter glanced at him out of the corner of her eye and thought that this was the goal. Not the files, not the protocols, not the production. A man who laughs because he can. Because no one broke him while he was learning. Across the room, Torres was eating with 2 colleagues. He was talking. His voice had changed, not in its timbre. It remained the same, a baritone made for large spaces. Something else had changed. The distance between what he was saying and why he was saying it. There had been no distance between them before. Words flowed directly from what he needed to receive. Now it was. Small, but visible. Hunter ate. The cafeteria hummed around her, familiar, alive, with its own smell of roasted and bad coffee. 300 people, each with their own. She thought about the Northwest, about how there would be a different cafeteria there.
Different exits, different smells, different people who didn't yet know who she was. Which they will find out in 9 days. She thought about Peterson. About how one day, not soon, but one day, she would find herself in front of something where the only correct path led through a place from which there was no exit. And that she would probably do what he did. Not because the instructions said so, simply because she can't do it any other way. It was bitter, and it was true.
and she had long since learned to accept those two words side by side. She finished her coffee, put the glass down. Standing up, I tidied up after myself, just like the first day. I folded everything neatly and wiped the table with a rag. Order is like a habit that you can't turn off. She passed Cole. He didn't notice. He was busy talking. Fine. So be it. Goodbyes are a ritual for those who need them, and she'd long known she didn't need them. Something else is needed. A year from now, Cole needs to remember some evening discussion and understand something he didn't grasp at the time. Becker needs to one day say to the young man, quote, 155, in the same tone he once heard himself say. This was a sufficient form of continuation. There was a security guard standing at the exit of the cafeteria, the same one who had stopped her with a blocked badge in November. He looked at her, then at the badge, which now read Major Hunter, SS07. He asked. Yes. He nodded and remained silent. He said finally, simply, as a statement. Yes, Hunter said. Okay. She went out into the corridor and went to the elevator. Inside her office, a locked folder containing the transition protocol lay on the desk. On Becker's desk were Simone's case files. Cole's mind was racing with several things he didn't yet know he knew. She pressed the elevator button and waited. The doors opened. She entered. I pressed the first floor. The doors closed. Outside the windows at the end of the corridor, Philadelphia in mid-March is grey and damp, with the first hint of spring to come, but you just can't see where it's coming from yet. The elevator went down. Hunter looked at the numbers above the door. 3, 2, 1. The doors opened. She walked out, crossed the hall. She nodded to the guard at the turnstile, the other one, the morning one. He nodded. I went outside. The air was damp and smelled of the river. Cars were on the street. Someone was walking with an umbrella, although it hadn't rained yet. Someone's dog was looking at a crow. Hunter reached the car. She opened it. She placed a dark notebook on the passenger seat, the last one from this city. She took out her phone. One unread. Flight details. Seattle. Departure at 6 a.m. She put the phone away and started the car. In the rear-view mirror is the front of the administration building, a flag in the wind, 2 patrolmen at the entrance with coffee. A normal morning at a normal institution that is functioning a little better than it did 4 months ago. That was enough. She drove out onto the street and turned. Ahead was a bridge over the river, then a highway to the north, then an airport, then a plane, then something about which she only knew one word for now, northwest, and that there will be a cafeteria there, and that she will enter it, look at the exits, and choose a place near the wall, and she will wait until she is seen correctly.